July the 17th, 1946. Trinity College, Cambridge. A man stands up to read a lecture about Isaac Newton. The lecture is not his. It was written by his brother, John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist of the 20th century, who died of a heart attack less than 3 months earlier and never got to deliver it. So Geoffrey Keynes read it for him, unrevised, exactly as his brother left it. And in that room, about the man whose name is on the laws of motion, he read out a verdict that has shaped how the world sees Isaac Newton ever since. Newton, he said, was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians. Keynes had a reason for saying it. 10 years earlier, he had bought a crate of Newton's private papers at auction. Papers Newton's own estate had looked at 2 centuries before and decided were unsuitable to publish. Inside were roughly 1 million words, not on gravity, not on optics, not on calculus, on alchemy, and almost everything you are likely to have heard about what that means is wrong, in 2 different directions at once. Start with the papers themselves, because the scale of them is the first surprise. When Newton died in 1727, he left behind millions of words of manuscript. Estimates vary. Around 8 million in his own hand, perhaps 10 million counting everything he copied out. And here is how they divide. The physics, the work that made him the most important scientist who ever lived, is a minority of it. According to the historian Sarah Dry, roughly half of everything he wrote is religious. About 1 million words are alchemical, much of it copied from other practitioners. Another 1 million or so concern his later career running the Royal Mint. The man we remember as the founder of modern physics spent most of his writing life on subjects we do not associate with him at all. His heirs read some of it, and they made a judgment. The writings, they decided, were not fit to be printed, so it went into a chest. Much of it stayed there for nearly 2 centuries, passed down through the family, occasionally glanced at, never properly examined. The scientific portion was given to Cambridge in 1872 and catalogued by 1888. The rest, the theology, the alchemy, stayed private. Then, on the 13th and 14th of July, 1936, the family sold it. Sotheby's, London. Hundreds of lots of Isaac Newton's private mind, going under the hammer. The auction was, by any measure, a failure. The entire collection raised a little over £9,000. Real money in 1936, but a trivial sum for the interior life of the man who wrote the Principia. Sotheby's gave more promotion that week to a sale of old master paintings. Keynes was in the room. He bought what he could out of his own pocket and spent the following years quietly buying more, trying to reassemble what the sale had scattered. Much of it he eventually gave to King's College, Cambridge, where it remains. So what was actually in them? Not spells. This is the first thing to correct, and it matters more than it sounds. Newton was not sitting in candlelight muttering incantations. He was running a laboratory. For decades, in rooms at Trinity College, he kept furnaces burning, sometimes for days at a time, and worked with real substances: antimony, mercury, lead. He ground things, heated things, dissolved things, distilled things, and wrote down what happened in obsessive detail. He copied out the works of earlier practitioners in his own hand. He assembled his own furnaces. He kept notes on results that failed. In the 1970s, an analysis of a lock of Newton's hair found high levels of mercury. Some writers have linked that to the breakdown he suffered in 1693. The link remains speculative, and it is worth saying so clearly. What is not speculative is the labor. Judging by what survives, an extraordinary share of Newton's working life went into this. Which raises the obvious question: and it is the question this whole video exists to answer honestly. Why? Here is where the popular story takes over, and here is where it goes wrong the first time. The version you have probably encountered goes something like this. Newton was secretly a mystic. His alchemy was hidden wisdom, ancient knowledge passed down in code, and somewhere in that work is where his real insight came from. Gravity. Invisible force, acting at a distance across empty space. Sounds occult. So perhaps he found it in the occult. It's a wonderful story. There is no good evidence for it. The most thorough modern study of this material is by the historian of science William Newman, who spent years on the manuscripts and then did something almost nobody had done. He went into a laboratory and repeated Newton's experiments, actually performed them with period techniques to find out what Newton was seeing. And Newman's conclusions refuse both of the romantic readings. He does not find that Newton's alchemy was a religious search for God hidden in matter, and he does not find that Newton pursued alchemy in order to understand gravitational attraction. The manuscripts do not support either story. They support something less thrilling and considerably more interesting. Newton was doing what historians now call chemistry, spelled with a Y, to mark that the modern split between respectable chemistry and disreputable alchemy did not yet exist. In the 17th century, they were one field, and it was a serious field. For many natural philosophers, alchemy was a major framework for understanding matter, that substances are composed of principles that can be separated, purified, and recombined, and that with sufficient skill, one material can be transformed into another. Look at that claim without the centuries of ridicule attached to it. Is it obviously absurd? Substances really can be broken into components. Materials really do transform under heat and pressure. Lead and gold really are made of the same underlying stuff. And we now know that transmuting one into the other is genuinely possible, just not chemically. It takes a particle accelerator and costs vastly more than the gold is worth. The alchemists were not fantasists for thinking matter was transformable. They were wrong about the mechanism. That is a completely different kind of error. And it was not fringe. Robert Boyle, whose name is on the gas law taught in every school, was deep in the same work. This was what serious natural philosophers did. Newton wasn't sneaking off to do something disreputable. He was participating in mainstream research. Which brings us to the second correction, and this one is about Keynes. Think about what actually happened in 1936. An economist, brilliant, but not a historian of science, buys a mass of manuscripts nobody has properly read. He works through them, alone, and finds page after page of material that looks nothing like Newton in the textbooks. Symbols, code names, recipes, copied passages from obscure authors. He is genuinely shocked, and he reaches for a phrase to capture the shock: the last of the magicians. It is a magnificent line. It is also a first impression, written by someone outside the field, in wartime, without access to his own library, about documents that had never been systematically studied by anyone. Keynes says as much himself in the lecture. He apologizes for it, explains that the war had deprived him of the time and the resources to treat the subject as it deserved, and that provisional first impression became the permanent public image of Newton's alchemy for the next 80 years. Modern historians push back on it hard, not because Keynes was foolish, but because the framing does the opposite of what it appears to do. Calling Newton the last of the magicians makes his alchemy sound like a throwback, a medieval residue clinging to a modern mind. The current view is close to the reverse. Newton's chemistry was not the past intruding on the future. It was ordinary, contemporary, serious research. It was what the science of his moment looked like. So we have removed two comfortable stories: Newton, the secret mystic, decoding forbidden wisdom, and Newton, the last magician, one foot in a vanishing magical world. What is left is harder to hold, and it is the reason this story is worth telling. Newton applied the same mind to two problems, the same patience, the same obsessive record-keeping, the same willingness to spend 20 years on something, the same
Observe.
method. Observe.
Experiment. Record.
Write down
Repeat.
what happens. Try again. One of those investigations produced the Principia, and with it the foundation of modern physical science. The other produced 1,000,000 words that never reached what he was looking for. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. While he was doing them, they did not feel different. There was no moment when Newton stepped out of the laboratory and thought, that furnace work, that's the nonsense. These equations, these are the real thing. Both were careful, both were empirical. Both were pursued for decades by the most capable mind of his century. The difference between them was invisible from inside. It only became visible later, from outside, once there was a chemistry that could explain why the furnaces would never work. That is not a comfortable lesson, and I do not want to soften it. We tend to imagine that being rigorous is enough, that if you are careful, honest, hardworking, and evidence-driven, you will end up somewhere true. Newton was all of those things, at a level almost nobody has ever matched, in both halves of his working life. It was not enough. Half of it was still a dead end. Rigor does not guarantee you are right. It only guarantees that if you are wrong, you were wrong for reasons someone can eventually trace. And that, in the end, is what saved the good half of Newton's work. Not that he was more careful with the Principia. He wasn't. It was that later generations built the tools to test both and found that alchemy's central theory of matter could not account for what its practitioners were seeing. You can feel a small version of this in your own life. Not everything you are confident about is correct. That part everyone accepts. The harder thought is that from the inside, the beliefs that are wrong feel exactly like the ones that are right. They come with the same certainty and often the same evidence. Newton could not tell his two bodies of work apart. It is worth being modest about how well any of us can. Nothing here diminishes him. If anything, it does the opposite. 1,000,000 words spent on a mistaken theory of matter by the man who got motion and gravity and light and calculus right. That is not an embarrassment to be explained away. It is what inquiry costs. And the work was not wasted in the way it looks. Alchemy's theory died, but its laboratory craft, the furnaces, the glassware, the discipline of recording what happened, passed directly into the chemistry that replaced it. Most of the intellectual labor of history has gone into dead ends, and the people doing it were not fools. They were working with the evidence available, in the framework available, as carefully as they could. Newton just did more of it than anyone, on both sides of the line, and left the receipts. They sat in a chest for 200 years. They sold for the price of a house. And what they actually show is not a magician, it is a scientist, doing science extremely well on a question that had no answer. Ancient wisdom, quantum mystery, direct knowing. This quantum gnosis